You're here because Mastercard Center for Growth has been pioneering data for inclusive policymaking for a number of years. You developed the Inclusive Growth Score. Thinking what you've heard in the conversation, what could we learn about how can data be more powerful in driving change in cities?
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone. I think hearing the stories that Katie, Sarah, and Marcia are telling us from different parts of the US is very inspiring. I think when policymakers, when local decision makers are setting the right objectives and also have access to the more sophisticated tools and maps like the SPI, good things can happen. And it actually took me back, Michael, like 5 years ago when I joined the Center for Inclusive Growth. It was a time you might remember in the US when opportunity zones were being created, and I was touring the country and asking local decision makers about inclusive growth, and I would get blank stares because inclusive growth was not a thing. They knew, how to measure jobs, they knew how to measure growth, they knew how to, attract businesses, but there was this notion that you couldn't see more, that you couldn't look into the distribution. And what's happened in the last 5 years, and I was lucky enough to see it firsthand, is that equity became an actual policy objective. It became an imperative. And I think the notion was there, and Marcia just mentioned, the idea of social justice has been there for a long time. It might have not been the priority, but it also might be the case that there was no data to action on it. So there are, I think, two concurrent revolutions that we've seen in 5 years in US policymaking that I hope for our friends who are from other parts of the world that they spread out. One is a data revolution. We have more data and data tools in the US than ever before, and a lot of it is coming from the private sector, the social sector, not just from government. And the other revolution is the equity revolution. We're seeing really innovative responses to the things we saw during the pandemic, to the things that we couldn't unsee after George Floyd, to kind of this stepping up of this equity notion in things like chief equity officers in US cities, or the type of work that we're seeing displayed here today. So when you bring those two things together, a new policy objective and then a new set of tools and data, I think I can be optimistic about those maps that haven't changed in so many years.
Yeah, this is the thing, we do know that change is possible. Things can change. The art is, how do we take the resources that are starting to flow, get them to the right places to actually move the needle on those kind of outcomes. Arturo, we're very excited about the way that this data can be used, not just by city governments, not just by philanthropic and other organizations, but businesses, but also ultimately investors. Investors are interested increasingly in these ESG priorities. A lot of concern about greenwashing and people faking the data. That's not the case with social progress data. What about the investors, the capital markets, and the role they can play in partnering with cities and driving change?
We've already seen the adoption of some of these tools, at least with the Inclusive Growth Score. We know that many community development financial institutions are using them. Some CDFIs have it, basically to make sure that the places that they're investing in are those where the need is the highest. We've seen impact investors and blended capital providers kind of gravitate to these notions of how do you measure the impact as well as the returns. I think it's slowly making its way to bigger and bigger pools of capital. Goldman Sachs is launching an inclusive growth fund as part of its sustainability funds. So, we went from blank stares when I said inclusive growth 5 years ago to Goldman Sachs having an inclusive growth fund. I think that's quite a little journey there. So again, I'm hopeful that capital will match the places where the need is the most. hopefully in a way that, as if we learn from the past, that is sustainable and builds the resilience that Marcia was talking about.